Hey everyone, I'm Clive,
And I'm Louis.
and today we are going to be talking about 3 steps to BIM compliance. The agenda will be, first of all, talking about when BIM goes wrong, and that's really to highlight the importance of having a compliance workflow. The second one is an ultimate BIM checklist to help us to define those requirements that we need.
And the third one, how to achieve glorious BIM. So tying those two together and really making sure that all that hard work that's gone in a project is glorious.
So the first one, talking about when BIM goes wrong and why we need compliance. Let's take a look.
Why is that?
So compliance, as a general topic, just to introduce first of all, especially because we've got lots of BIM resources, many standards around the world, they are thankfully consolidating. And really with those, we're able to define rules and use those standards to follow. And as long as everyone's following those rules, we are compliant, are we not?
Yeah. Sure are.
But we've seen lots of other industries with some major challenges, and one of them, the accounting space, has gone through that. Lots of regulation, lots of rules in place, because it's incredibly important to get that right so that everyone's following the same rules and so everyone's following the same standards.
Many examples, like in sports, we have referees and rules that we have to follow, and we have referees who help us stay on track. And without those, things can be chaotic.
Yeah.
So
maybe we need BIM referees.
Yeah.
Yeah. What might happen if we don't follow those rules?
It's a good question.
Especially in accounting.
What would happen? Oh.
Sometimes these sorts of things occur, and whilst it can be looked back on as potentially a not funny, because it was pretty severe. It was the largest bankruptcy in the US at that point in time, and some malpractice, some bad things going on there. And that actually caused a lot of new rules to be put in place, and a lot of new regulations to be put in place.
Lessons learned.
Absolutely. But how does that relate to BIM? How does having standards and following standards relate to BIM?
Well, in BIM, we have quantities and estimates and money involved as well, and guesstimates.
So one of the BIM uses that it's actually rising right up to the top, right alongside coordination.
Right.
And having a fully coordinated model in order to take quantities from, it's an incredibly important BIM use and incredibly important to get right. So if we have a model that is given to us and we know that there are some open or in progress items and maybe it's not complete yet, we would really want to wait until it was complete. So if I go backwards and forwards on this slide here, you can see that there is a difference,
pretty big difference,
the amount of elements, etc. I actually suffered this in real life on a BIM project. We were the VDC managers, and unfortunately, a model had been used that was not complete. And the end result was that the quantities were obviously lower, and the price, the budget that was put for that project originally, was way lower than it should have been. And that caused some severe impact. So for us, that specific nature of the model and having compliance to make sure that it was complete was really important and continues to be. The other part to that is being able to measure, and not every measurement is taken in the same way. So rules of measurement, again, related, we were talking about accounting practices, how you measure profitability, for example, how you measure what you put on the balance sheet, where it goes. Here in our industry, how do you measure a window? Is it inside of an opening? Is it the outside? Is it the center line? It's really important to agree on those rules.
Great.
Yeah.
We're done.
So we have a scope. We've got a few rules.
Yeah, we've got some
That's
rules in place.
Success, yeah?
Yeah.
Easy.
Sounds good. Let's go. Let's start the project.
But what happens between starting and success?
Yeah.
And here is example. So Jessica goes to school on her first day, and we can see that there's a lot that goes on between her first day and successful graduation. We know that that's not a straight line. We know that there's a lot that goes on between. But from a school and from an education perspective, how do we monitor and control that?
Report cards, right? So every year we get a report card. However, we don't just wait every year to get a report card. We have progress reports as well, which keep us in line in between. So I have children, and every month I get a report card, and it helps us to focus on what we need to discuss or just kind of go over and over, whether it's reading or math.
Absolutely. A little shout out to my 3 little monkeys. Excellent report cards. And that's how we know whether we're going to give them a reward, or we might not give them a reward.
Take away an Xbox.
Come on, mine want Xboxes at the moment. They think that that's standard. Everyone has an Xbox. That's what they say.
How else are they going to get internet?
So how does this relate to BIM? It's a good question. Let's bring it back to BIM. Right? So we look at projects as they progress over time, and it would be a perfect world if projects progressed gradually,
right,
and we went through stages and those milestones were achieved and everything was perfect. But we know that in our world, work begins, people mess around, there's a bit of a panic, and usually, a lot of work is done at the end just before the deadline.
Yeah, it's just natural.
Human nature.
Yeah, human nature.
Sometimes
someone gives you a deadline and it might be a month away, and hey, I've got time. And then little time flies. We always say that every day. And then all of a sudden, 2 days before, we're crunching or crying that our deadline is due. So
unfortunately, what happens? Voila! Everybody's deliverable gets handed in, and we put it into the machine, the grinder, to give us a report on how many thousands of clashes we have.
Sometimes that's one person. Sometimes if you're lucky, there's a team that's consuming those models so that they can review them. But unfortunately, it's not always like that. It's always one person having just with this bottleneck.
And that's if you get the models at that deadline. So I think we've all been there. There's lots of different situations where sometimes you'll have a model early, you'll have models late, you'll have models incomplete, even though they're delivered. And it's a challenge. It's a real challenge. And sometimes
then
the train comes off the track.
Project derails. Your estimates are off. Your coordination is off.
We're tying it into children's toys as well. This is great.
Whether you were expecting your BIM for AR or VR, something's out of line because we didn't meet those expectations.
So that's really talking about the importance of getting it right. And we talked a couple of different instances there about what happens when BIM goes wrong. And understanding that compliance is really key. But what is compliance? How do you define something that somebody understands?
What is an A?
Yeah.
How do you get graded an A?
Exactly.
How do you get graded a B?
So the ultimate BIM requirements checklist. Should we take a look? Wow, that's a lot of requirements. These are just some of the requirements that you might want to define on a project.
These are just some of the categories of the requirements, and then we've listed out some questions you might ask of those requirements. So imagine the possibilities and
different permutations.
Yep.
What he said. And then,
so number
should we
one,
go through them?
Yeah, let's go through them. So number one, the first thing we need to do that's going to set the tone for the rest of these checklists is define the purpose. So if we can define the purpose, what we're going to be using the model, it's going to lead to the next thing that we can then begin to answer ourselves.
And when we are going to require it. So what the information delivery milestone is, so the purpose, the BIM use, and when is it required. And then how about creating a scope with a list that is defining exactly what should be modeled rather than leaving out to chance, and understanding that you're not going to get too much or too few elements, and you're not going to have gaps or overlap. And then being able to define what the geometry is that you're looking for. So is it a 2D representation? Is it just a symbol? Is it generic? Is it detailed? Is it fabrication level? What is the actual geometry that you're needing? And being able to simply define that for each of those milestones, in each of the information delivery milestones, is really powerful.
And solving this or just being able to answer that ahead of time really helps people save time early on in the project when you might not have that information available anyway. So, saying, hey, I only need this 2D representation right now would save our team tremendous time. So being specific as to what you would want. And then defining the reliabilities is important.
What are you going to use it for?
Yeah.
Is it just a preliminary location that you need? Or is it actually needed to be coordinated with all of the other trades? Is it an as-built? Is it defined to a certain level of accuracy? Is it a measured accuracy? Is it represented accuracy? All of those questions need to be defined so that we have a clear set, an understanding of what the use is. And then we might want...
Checklist. So we have teams who are developing their own checklist that they have had for years. These are things that they need to review at certain milestones. They have certain elements that they might need. For example, here we're saying that we might need to ensure the points of connections before we put any fixtures for coordination.
Yep. So a list of tasks that might be required. And then we might need to provide documentation. And it might be, in this example, a Revit family or a PDF spec. You could even define example deliverables and attach them. Could be calculations. It could be engineering standards. And then we want to be able to include best practices and any instructions that we might need for specific requirements. If it's detailed enough, then, and it's easy enough for people to understand and follow, then you'll actually get what you're looking for rather than have a miss on the expectation. So just free notes about something.
Most of the time we have these meetings and, not everyone involved in the project who is actually designing, drawing, drafting, modeling, isn't in that meeting. So we need to make sure that we can share those those notes to those who are actually doing the work. So this could be a really good opportunity for that.
And then defining information requirements, a really key part of a workflow when you've got multiple parties involved and there's exchanges of information at certain points in time. What is required? Is it a quantity that the estimator needs? Is it a warranty parameter that the owner might need at the end of the day? What is important and when is it required? Being able to define that, what standards you're following. Is it an IFC parameter? Is it a something that is just a placeholder for data? Is it a requirement that a specific parameter must be included and it must be within certain ranges? There's a lot that you can get into when it comes to information.
Yeah, all the way from estimation to FM. So it's a wide range.
Yep. And we recommend that you have everything in one place. So capturing all of those requirements in one cell, we're able to really clearly define a lot of data in a very rich but very condensed way. And we see everything from the geometric requirements, who is responsible, what the information requirements are, the checklists, attachments, notes, etc.
Who's responsible? One of the most important ones.
Yeah. Who owns that deliverable? Oh, okay. So we've talked about what happens when BIM goes wrong and understanding compliance, the real importance about it, and then the ultimate BIM requirements checklist.
Right. Well, how you're going to get graded.
Yep.
So, how do you grade?
How do you grade? How do you achieve glorious BIM?
Right.
Well, that doesn't turn out to be glorious BIM when there is even just one bad model.
Yeah, if there's some sort of miscommunication in your checklist, in your information, one bad model, unfortunately, can...
Yep, you know what a bad apple in the fruit bowl does?
Can fault the entire BIM project. What's coordination if you're missing mechanical duct? The piping's fine, but there's missing mechanical duct. So we're obviously avoiding some clashes that could or could not have been there. So
coordinating around something that's not there is pretty tough. So how can we eliminate those bad apples? How can we go through a workflow that will help us to eliminate them?
Yeah.
Keeping it all in the same place is number one. So we talked about there having the opportunity to scope and also verify that scope by gathering the requirements and the deliverables in the same place. Really, really powerful step.
Mm-hmm. Simple model validation. So, being able to easily link what requirements and what elements should be tied together, just going through that process very easily would help you save so much time, but also not miss a beat, miss a beat, a checklist, an item.
Not just having them in the same place, but linked. But that's the power behind having one tool for this workflow.
Having the right tool set is important.
Having the right tool set.
Whether you can answer those questions, how can you grade something without a pencil or a highlighter
or a ruler?
A ruler, exactly. So having those tools at hand is very important to
being able to interrogate, take sections, take measurements, understand the parameters that are extract these elements as well. So this is a really quite cool one, being able to group similar elements together, take them outside of the building and be able to interrogate them in a group rather than disparate places in the building.
One of the best examples is I personally had to go through and review that every light fixture met those requirements, and in a building that's hundreds of lights, thousands of lights, this feature would have been really nice for me. Saves so much time.
Absolutely. And then being able to check information and understand, again, in the same location, what the requirements were. Okay, we needed the materials for the stringer and the tread, it looks like there was something defined maybe, and we needed to be able to check that. And starting to see more and more of that being automated to make that workflow super simple. And then when we have those tasks filtered for the teams that are involved in that model deliverable, going through that is actually quite fun to check these off, and they fly out, and then we start to see those elements that have been verified color-coded. So as we are filtering in this example for the architect's tasks, and you can see that the percentage of verified elements are increasing, and we can filter for those elements that have been verified or that are yet to be verified.
This really helps not just compare the model to what's from the requirements. As you go, you're verifying, you're also highlighting. Essentially, you're highlighting the model, what's been verified. But as newer models get added, newer versions get added, you might find there's new elements that need to be verified, and those would stand out very clearly. So having a way to being able to track version control is really useful in these cases.
And then we would not want to waste time of ours or our team members or other people around using deliverables with poor quality models. And so making sure that workflow of compliance, and we talked about the importance of compliance and the importance of having a very detailed but very clear and simple checklist, and then being able to go through these steps to validate that that has actually been adhered to before we publish the model is incredibly powerful and very, very important. So once we publish the model, you can see then it will be available for download. This is following the ISO standards as well. So making sure that we know there's work in progress, that there's a shared status, and then there's a published status that can only be accessed by certain people at certain times with that controlling and the privilege.
Yeah, and this really helps whether you're receiving a model to verify this or sending a model. So, you sending the model to a client, contractor, whoever that is going to be taking a look at this or using it, it really relieves a lot of stress off your shoulders.
You don't have to download and upload it somewhere else and keep a whole set of...
Just knowing you verified and you've stamped that, and that's a higher quality model that you've provided.
Yep, absolutely. And ask us about BIM 360 integration as well. So in conclusion, we've talked about the importance of having compliance, but it's really having the whole team be aware of the consequences of bad BIM, of poor quality BIM, getting into that workflow and becoming a bit of a problem. And unfortunately, it sometimes can kill the team morale. That's one of the points in here, by wasting too much of people's time. So making it much clearer, making those final requirements simple and clear, being able to see the progress update as we go, and making that an integral part of your workflow so that you can always publish a model that you have full confidence in and that you know is compliant.